What I'd like to do, first of all, if we can just go around and just give everyone an opportunity to introduce themselves. So Ben, if I can start with you, please.
Sure. I'm a uh, philosophy instructor at Perimeter College and a columnist for Jacobin Magazine, and I have a podcast and YouTube show called Give Them an Argument.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. David?
I'm David. My Twitter handle's Discord Spies. I used to do YouTube videos and troll Nazis. Now I just sort of am a lefty shit poster and I argue with people sometimes. It's fun.
Okay, good stuff. Logic Guy?
Yeah, I'm a beloved leftist shitposter and Twitter's #1 Dave Franco fan, and I do a podcast called The Original Blocked and Reported. There's a fake one that I'm not affiliated with. We're dropping a new episode before the election on the #1 issue of the 2020 election, and I also do a new chat show that is weekly called Logic Guy After Dark, and I'm uploading a new episode of that either tonight or tomorrow morning. Featuring my good friend Rico, who I think you all know.
Okay, cool. Viv?
Hey, I'm Mix Vivian Wolf on Twitch, Twitter, YouTube. I am a historian, anti-fascist, and extremist researcher who talks about cults and extremism over on my Twitch channel. I've just had a whole week of interviews with extremist researchers, and they'll be up on YouTube pretty soon, so it's up to me there as well. Thanks.
Okay, and Touring News.
Hi everybody, I am Touring News, or Brad, if you wanted to call me by my name. I've been on Twitch for maybe 20 months or so. I do a lot of coverage of international news events, macroeconomics, monetary systems, kind of like geopolitics. I felt that there were enough people kind of doing the coverage of the United States affairs all the time, so I kind of shifted my focus internationally. So thank you for having me, I appreciate it.
Okay, good stuff. So just to explain why I wanted to put this panel together, actually, Dario, who's supposed to be joining us, was kind of the impetus in some ways for this panel. Sadly, he can't be with us today. Basically, as we know, the concept of free speech and big tech censorship is a talking point that the right kind of own at the moment. And what I wanted to do is get some lefties or left-leaning people together, just have a broad discussion about some of the challenges and issues around this conversation, and maybe discuss some ideas and some thoughts on how we can approach this and tackle this from a leftist perspective, rather than just sort of ceding ground to the right on this conversation. So there's a couple of sort of conversation points that I want to dig into, but just initially, I just want to get everyone's broad perspective on the question of kind of big tech censorship and free speech. So I'm throwing it to you as broadly as possible to do what you want with. So I'll start with you, Touring News. What's your personal perspective and opinions on the concept of free speech and tech censorship?
Okay, I wrote something up. It'll maybe take me about 2 minutes. So the intention for my workday today was to sit down and research and take notes in preparation for the topic. Instead, I mostly was just anxious the entire day and unproductive, and I didn't get anything done. I do have a few of my thoughts. They're just my thoughts. But I kept returning to a dark belief that a lot of the fractures that are within United States society at the moment, it doesn't exactly feel that we can handle either free speech or censorship at the moment, just due to kind of the divided nature of the nation, the way the conversations are going back and forth amongst different people of different positions. So I eventually wanted to shift over to discussing about algorithms. Our public square has been replaced by a few tech monopolies via the platforms YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook. Many would argue that we don't want private companies dictating the norms and content of our speech, nor would we like the government to have this ability either. I mostly fall in the camp of the dreaded, quote, free speech absolutist, quote, for lack of a better term or phrase to describe my position. I could discuss why and everything and so forth, but these are just, one person's opinions that I'm sure many people have expressed before. So to me, where my focus landed was the truer problem of the time, which would be the algorithms that either drive us to certain content or recommend us to different channels. From the YouTube continuous video play to Twitter's recommended follow list, to the way that Facebook engineers a platform of outrage. Once a person gets into a certain silo, the programs written by the tech giants manipulate us into viewing deeper and deeper content that will agree with that worldview that we've expressed through our history of interaction on the platform. So for me, at the moment, instead of discussing which speech should be removed, quarantined, or otherwise censored, it feels much more important to first begin with deleting any and all algorithms of manipulation on all social media platforms. They've done more damage to society than any benefits they could ever possibly hope to provide, past, present, or future. Until we democratize the platforms, have them owned by the public, have their dividends pay for healthcare, education, and other programs, and develop a way for the populace to voice their sense of content moderation, I think that the minimum that we have to do is delete the most manipulative aspects of the platforms that we use, the algorithms.
Okay, Viv?
Woof. Touring came really, really well prepared. So I place a lot of blame on social media platforms in general for the rise of extremism over the last few years. The spread of QAnon, the spread of the ability of far right militias and so on to be able to organize and talk to each other on Facebook and recruit. These are huge fucking problems with these platforms. And I think at the very least we need to be pressuring those platforms until, as Turing said, we can somehow get hold of them, take them into public ownership and work a lot better with them. We need to be pressuring those platforms into using their presence in the public space as responsibly as possible. I don't necessarily believe in government legislation around this. I think the United Kingdom does have really good sort of prescribed groups law that is very, very difficult to be prescribed under. But I worry that if we implemented it in the United States, for example, it would be subject to such high-level partisan scrutiny that it would probably end up being torn apart, and random groups that just happen to oppose political parties would be put in under that prescribed group label. So I think ultimately it comes down to people power and generally people being able to hold these social media companies to account by getting together, organizing, going on TV shows and so on, and making sure that the blame is laid squarely at the feet of these social media companies for the rise of the far right and cultic movements like QAnon.
Okay, Logic Guy?
Thanks. Sorry, I have kind of a sore throat. That's why I'm drinking water. I've been accused of being a free speech absolutist. I deny that. I don't think that there's any single virtue that all on its own outweighs all other virtues. But what I do advocate for is an extremely broad and extensive standard for protection of speech. And a very high bar for what qualifies as an exception. Additionally, I think the left, meaning the mainstream, liberal left, has completely invested in the wrong direction. They've completely embraced this idea of big tech censorship, while the right, what you've seen, there's some really bad ideas about censorship on the right too, including overturning Section 230. But the right has much more invested in a decentralized network, of propaganda network, essentially. We've seen what happens when the decentralized network goes up against big tech censorship. It's not even a contest. We just saw big tech censorship absolutely fail to contain that Hunter Biden story, and I think that's what's going to happen every time. So I think that the mainstream left has been sold a false bill of goods. The tech companies are not on their side. They're actively promoting all of those far right dipshits that they claim that they're censoring. While we've seen what happens, like Jacobin, for instance, or Telesur have also run into problems on all of those networks. So they're absolutely not our friends. And I can't agree more with Turing News when he talks about the importance of break them up, democratize them. That's the solution to big tech, not censorship. Thank you.
Okay, Dave?
Dave's stuck.
Dave's frozen in time. Okay.
He's playing a prank on us.
Dave, if you can sort it out, what I'll do is skip David. Ben, what's your take on this?
Yeah, I mean, I'm closer to the position that we've heard from a couple of other people, so I don't want to drone on for too long about it, because it would get repetitive. But I'm not a free speech absolutist. I think that there are things that would be legitimate to deplatform from YouTube, for example, or Twitter. But I think that it's very worrying that the way that this is done, for the most part, is very by these big tech companies, tends to be capricious, that you have extremely vague terms of service and no meaningful process by which you can appeal the decisions that are made to deplatform people. I don't necessarily think that it should be that should literally be like AT&T. You know, they just provide the phone service, and you can say anything that you like on a call, and you might get in trouble for it, you know, from the law, but not particularly from AT&T. I probably can't be entirely like that. I mean, I don't know that I'd say that you should be able to, if you have something, a YouTube video or a tweet that really crosses the line into harassment or incitement. I think there probably are legitimate exceptions like that. But I think that we should have a very clear, like an ideal version of YouTube or Twitter, which would, as I'm uninterestedly agreeing with everybody else because it's a panel of leftists, which would probably be a publicly owned version of it. I think that version of these platforms ideally would have very specific, unambiguous terms of service, laying out exactly what the circumstances were under which you could have, you could be deplatformed in some way, and a meaningful process by which you could appeal it, and have some kind of neutral third party make decisions about this stuff. So, and I do have some of the concerns that have been expressed by others, that sometimes some people on the left, or certainly progressives more broadly, have tended to be way too libertarian about this. What I mean by way too libertarian is that they've adopted this kind of legalistic idea of what free speech is. That free speech is the government. Free speech protects you against the government censoring you. And of course, we live in a capitalist society, so big tech platforms are private entities, but they have an enormous amount of control over the flow of information. And I think as socialists, we should be concerned about the free speech issues that raises, and that even if we aren't necessarily absolutists about it, like Alex Jones, for example, I think that it's possible that a better process would have still might have had the same result, or maybe not as sweeping. Maybe only certain videos could be taken down, not his entire channel. But some of the stuff with the Sandy Hook parents maybe did really cross the line into incitement. And for that matter, I think there's even an argument you can make that that selling fake medicine shouldn't be allowed. But I also think it's disturbing that a major broadcast with a huge audience can be taken down with very little meaningful explanation, and certainly no meaningful process for the company having to explain its action or allow them to appeal. And similarly, it's very disturbing that a news outlet like the New York Post can be blocked because well, supposedly because of that the story was dubious. But I think, I say this as somebody who voted for Biden in my swing state, right? I think that we know what the context was that led to that decision. And as Logic Guy's already indicated, this is something that there is every reason to worry will be used against the left, because the corporate oligarchs who own these platforms are not our friends. And I do hear what Vivian is saying about the way that having it be a relative free-for-all has allowed for the rise of some really unsavory forces. But I think in the long term, I guess I'm optimistic enough about building a revitalized left that I'm more worried about what empowering these oligarchs to make these decisions in ways that make it easier for them to censor people. I'm more worried about what that will do to us than I am about what letting it be free for all will do for those unsavory types.
Okay, and finally, David, are you there? Are you free?
Yeah, I'm back. I didn't even realize that I'd cut out. Sorry about that.
It's all good. Don't worry about it. Just broadly your perspective on the kind of concept of free speech and tech censorship.
So I guess I'm probably going to be the biggest advocate of big tech censorship here. Then, the last few years I've been a very serious anti-fascist, and and my experience with the way they've interacted is that in a lot of ways, big tech has actually more often than not failed to effectively censor these people, rather than been too lenient or libertarian on the issue. And at the same time, I think that the fact that we often I think the problem is that we frame the conversation way too much around like, should we deplatform Nazis or something. I think, like, to some extent, who we're deplatforming is or who we're censoring. These are all like very separate discussions where I don't think like principle actually matters a huge amount in this situation because of how different lots of these contexts are. And I also don't really blame big tech too much when it comes to a lot of the dissemination of radicalization, because I think a lot of these problems are actually more inherent to social media entertainment platforms than we want to admit. I think that when we're talking about like algorithms and stuff like that, I think that the main problem is that a lot of these things weren't ever intended for political content in the first place, and they've the cat's out of the bag. They're all trying to catch up, and they don't really know what they're doing. But then like, they're being made to they've got very hard positions they're being put in, and I think, as much as I don't think they're making the right decisions very often, I understand that they are trying to some extent. But yeah, that's where I'm at.
I'm going to throw it out there to open the conversation up. So if there's any disagreement or anything you want to push back on or discuss, go ahead. If we get stuck, I've got some ideas of what we can talk about. So
Yeah.
I mean, if that's the oh, I'm sorry, Ben, go.
No. It was me.
Sorry.
But you go ahead.
Oh, my mistake. If that's the defense of big tech, then I think that the case for big tech censorship is even worse than I thought. Like, oh well, they're trying. I mean, just watching these bumbling idiots pour gasoline on everything week after week has, if anything, radicalized me on breaking up big tech. They all I see is them making it worse, and not by accident either.
They should absolutely be broken up. That I'm not even pointing at that, but I think, like, when it comes to like individual cases of censorship, I think so. Like, for example, the Alex Jones thing was mentioned. That worked.
Mm-hmm.
As far as I'm concerned, like, Alex Jones has become irrelevant to most extents. Like, remember at one point the current sitting president was on Alex Jones's show. Like, he had a very measurable effect on the 2016 election. He hasn't really had an effect on the 2020 election.
So
just
okay.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So there's a prevailing opinion on this panel that the big tech should be broken down and democratized. I don't think anybody here is like disagreeing with that, right? However, I think that if you're going to base any element of this conversation around what we should do and how we should address things on that premise, you're living in a fucking fantasy world. There's no way that big tech is going to be broken down and democratized anytime in the near future. And if anything, it's more likely to be taken under some kind of government control or large corporate control with heavy regulation if you allow Trump to get his way, right? So yeah, sorry, go ahead, Ben. Yeah.
Oh, actually, because you did say that, right? This is what I was going to ask earlier. I was worried it'd be too far off topic, but I do just want to know, because I've heard two or three of you talk about two things that seem pretty different to me, right? One is taking big tech into public ownership, and the other is breaking it up. And I would think that those would be different, right? That those would be advocated by different people, because breaking it up, that's like the sort of progressive populist solution to powerful corporations, that that you break them up into smaller private units. And
I mean, that will never happen. Social media, the way that it works is like the three major platforms, when you think of like Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube, they all work in very, very different ways. If they were if they were particularly similar, one of them would just outdo the other one, like Facebook did with fucking MySpace.
It would just be where everyone goes.
Yeah. So
So
it's
so so
always
so,
gonna,
so
it's always
that's the
gonna
thing, right?
promote a
I
kind
guess I
of
don't really understand. I guess I don't really understand often what people mean when they talk about breaking them up because I think there are some small ways in which I could maybe understand that. You could separate Facebook Messenger from Facebook, so they wouldn't be the same company. You could
and
separate
Google from
Instagram
YouTube.
from both.
That's not small.
But
Facebook does
but
own
I do.
Snapchat and Instagram and WhatsApp. So if like you could arguably remove those from each other.
So I'll jump in because I think I understand what Ben.
those-
I think I get what Ben is discussing here a little bit. He's saying there's a
You
difference
could
between
remove those from each
democratization.
other, but-
There's a difference between democratization of the platforms and trying to disassemble them and break them into smaller pieces. And I believe that Ben is. I believe Ben is trying to say that democratization is the route of the conversation that he would appreciate it to go rather than like the breakup.
Well, yeah. I mean, I would think. I mean, yeah. I mean, my card's on the table, right? Like, I would prefer democratization, right? Which would to my mind involve bringing them into public ownership. Breaking them up just sounds like.
So would I, but it's offensive.
No. I agree. None of this is happening anytime soon, but I guess I'm just a little confused about what some people are advocating.
I think I'm responsible for conflating them because I said it by way of agreeing with Touring News. I was like, yeah, that's right. Break them up and democratize them. So I think I kind of committed that.
Yeah,
Cards on the table. I favor more breaking them up solution for various reasons that I could get into.
It seems to me that even if you okay, Facebook owns lots of stuff, right? Google, but it seems like if you had a version of YouTube that wasn't owned by that was owned by a company whose only possession was YouTube. That was it, right? They didn't own anything else in tech. That would still be a private entity that had a massive amount of control over the flow of information. Not as much, granted, right, as one that's also owns everything else that Google owns, but a really massive amount. And so I think that just given the nature of the technology, I'm not sure. I'm not sure how much it makes sense to think that you can solve the problem with this kind of trust busting, breaking them up solution. No,
I think honestly,
I would even go as far as to say that democratization or breaking them up, I don't really think that these are actually going to solve the inherent problems that we're discussing when it comes to social media censorship. Because
what problem wouldn't it solve? What's the inherent problem?
Okay, so should we go into the I think the algorithm discussion has come up a couple times with what people were talking about. So and this is where I want to say, like, I think the inherent concept of like the algorithm making like radicalizing people, I don't necessarily think that this is the fault of like anyone like trying to like necessarily make it happen, and I don't necessarily even think.
But
no,
okay, so to push back against that very quickly, Facebook has agreed that they've admitted that they manipulate people to get them to stay on the platform. Like they've done research to find out that if you get people disagreeing, they're going to stay longer than when they agree. And I mean, we all know that like YouTube will drive you down certain pipelines. We know that your Twitter recommended feed can do that. So I can't really agree.
But the point is that that recommended feed situation is basically a result of them being primarily entertainment platforms. Like politics is a very tiny is a tiny like slice of what actually happens on Facebook and Twitter, Twitter, and YouTube. We are minuscule compared to anything else on the platform. When these things are designed for things like music, for like video games, for like comedy skits and TV shows.
We literally just had the same exact problem with like neo-Nazi bands on Spotify. They fucking like just had to remove a whole bunch of them. This was a report that I think it came out from like Hope Not Hate not so long ago. They were on the fucking BBC talking about it. So like I don't think it necessarily matters what the media type is, but if I can maybe enunciate your point, like just or simplify it. The point is,
I will
bring.
I will point. So here's the point: is that because these algorithms are designed basically for people to find entertainment, and because we are on these platforms effectively, we weren't really ever intended to be here. This we are kind of using these sort of infotainment platforms, and like this has just become the place to be, and none of this stuff has actually been designed with the same kinds of checks and balances you would actually want for some kind of some kind of platform that would actually allow for politics. They are trying to catch up with this issue. These so basically, like, how do you create an algorithm that doesn't that would basically allow for someone to find music they like, right? That then would be able to determine the difference between political content and apolitical content.
It's very simple.
Where,
you press delete and then you let them search for it.
what do you mean? So you never have any recommended
Yes.
videos ever?
Yes.
No recommendation.
This is, I think it's one of the only. This would be. I'll let you go in a moment, Logic. Sorry, but yeah, this is kind of where I come from. I don't really see a way of getting around it otherwise. I don't think that we're all going to come to an agreement of like we want tech to censor or we want government to censor or so forth. So I think one of the best ways to mitigate harm at the moment would to just be to get rid of the recommended.
Well, no, I'm fine with tech censoring because I think either breaking it up or democratizing it is a pipe dream at the moment, and I think that
Why isn't censorship a pipe dream?
we have this awful fucking system, and we have to try and make it work for us as much as possible. So yeah, I am pro like Facebook wiping QAnon accounts off of their website and so on. However, the problem is that they do not have like they're not dedicated to it. Their feet aren't held to the fucking fire in terms of the standards that they should be upholding in making sure that extremist groups don't use their platforms, right? So what they need, and what I advocated for and said immediately after the huge QAnon purge, was like, this is good. They've got rid of a lot of big accounts and so on, but they'll be back in a couple of weeks under a different name, and the whole process will start up again, and they'll probably be exactly back where they were in like a month or two, right? So what they need is they need a team that is dedicated to researching, looking into these groups, right? Trying to identify extremist content and removing it from the platform.
I
And that
completely
way,
agree.
it's not going to show up in your recommended because it's not there.
Yeah. I think the idea of being able to remove a recommended feature or like just getting rid of the algorithms just doesn't, like, there isn't a realistic way to do that. Even if you search for something, there is some kind of process by which it's going to order order all of your search results that is going to be affected by word choice and how many views that piece of content has, etc., etc., etc. There is no way where algorithms and machine learning stuff is actually never gonna affect this stuff. At this point, we have to just accept that these are inherent problems to the existence of social media infotainment platforms. That just the fact that we are using like, there is a difference between, say, like a news website, say like, I don't know, Sky News or something. They can curate all of their content, so when they but you can't curate all of this. You're always catching up from what's on there. If you try to make this as like blind, as algorithm blind as possible, YouTube would just be like mostly Nazi conspiracy shit and like and UFO stuff and
they
like,
would plot the shit out of the content.
They already do. This is like one of the things that they're doing, like behind closed doors.
Okay, if I sorry, I just want to give some other people a chance to speak. So Ben, I just want to, what's your thoughts on kind of what's being discussed with the algorithm deletion? Or what do you think?
Well, I guess I think if we're going to do what Vivian says, and we're going to just like bake in the fact that big tech is for the foreseeable future going to be in the corporate hands that it's in, then that actually makes me much more nervous about empowering them to be more efficient and rigorous censors. Because if you're saying that these people who are the enemies of everything that we want, that are immensely profitable corporations, and hence the natural and instinctive enemies of everything that the left stands for, are going to be in control of this platform for the foreseeable future, then it seems to me we should be very concerned about having them build a bigger and better censorship machine that it's harder to get around by opening up.
They already do it. They
Yeah,
already do it. Why not make it work for us?
But you just said they don't do it enough. That you want them to do it more, and you want them to do a better job, and you want them to.
I want them to do a better job, and I also want them to.
Because you say, right, like right now you can get out of it because you can just open up a different account and you can be back in a week, and so you want them to build like a much better censorship machine, and we don't need to speculate about censorship is going to be primarily used against. I mean, the accounts that are most likely to be taken off for extremism already are by Palestinians, and they're most likely to be taken off because the Israeli government asked them to.
And you don't hear about it when the right-wing assholes get censored. It's front page news. When some pro-Palestinian group gets censored, crickets. You don't hear about it. That's the biggest.
That's true. But then the right-wing assholes.
That was literally the fucking point that I was making. That they already do it, and they're already pretty fucking effective against doing it against like marginalized communities and so on, because they just don't have as much of a power and as much of a voice. If you look at the disparity between like TERF accounts removed on Twitter and trans accounts that report them, right? If you look at, like you said, the Palestine-Israel conflict and Palestinian advocates and so on. If you look at like anti-fascists versus people like fucking Nick Fuentes on Twitter, like they're already really, really fucking good at like censoring left-wing opinions and voices, and it doesn't go particularly well reported. But what we need to do is we need to take that fucking energy, and we need to get them to start fucking censoring the far right shit on a.
I don't understand who really is. We don't control these levers.
I wouldn't. I would also point out that I actually and this is going to be probably one of my most controversial opinions. Is it's not. I think left wingers actually get censored more on these platforms. Precisely because, like, we're just worse at avoiding TOS violations, and like right-wingers are just very right-wing extremists have a culture of understanding that these platforms are going to censor them, and they will try and work within the system as best they can. Left-wingers kind of like want to post like.
Guillotine memes.
1312 guillotine memes. And do Minecraft.
Liberals get the bullet.
I agree with this to a certain point. However, the account of David Duke on Twitter, for example, is a very, very good example of somebody who absolutely breaches TOS on a daily fucking basis, talking about the Zionist-occupied government and shit, right? The account up until recently, how fucking long it took to get him off of Twitter, the account of Graham Linehan was another good example of somebody who repeatedly like breached TOS, motivated fucking hate mobs towards people, and attacked a particular minority group. So
that is true. That is true. But there's it's much harder to like get like one like Graham Linehan off of Twitter when he is posting something along the lines of like, oh, this misogynist man on Twitter is harassing women, and then sort of letting his stochastic, letting people like stochastically.
No, he was literally running around calling everybody and anybody a fucking rapist, dude. Like,
but that is much harder. Yeah, that's much harder to do than like some than some like small 13 follower trans person's account saying like, I hate TERFs, I hope they all end themselves in a video game, you know, or the actual I'm trying to like hide myself from Twitch right now. I don't even want to like this is the problem, is what I'm doing right now is trying to be careful, and the thing is that right wingers do this all the time, lefties really don't, And like this
I
is
think there is some
um,
disparity, but I don't think
there
that
is some
you're-
disparity, and this is the other thing, right? Right wingers break. The other thing is the right wingers do break these rules more often, more frequently, and in much worse ways. But they're better at like not breaking them in a technical sense, and they also bully these
what the
platforms
fuck
into
does
not
that
banning
even
them,
mean?
and they bully them into not banning them. So like
Wait, no.
the fact of
What's
the
the
matter
other
is,
thing that you just said? They're much better at not breaking them in a technical sense. You said they break them all the time and
oh yeah,
probably much more, but they don't break them in a
they can make
technical
it
sense.
look like they're not breaking them as much. Like it's like I said, they're much more focused on very like stochastic methods of harassment and stuff like that. Um, like if you go into like pretty much like any like left wing girls mentions or whatever. There's like weird awkward insults or like the kinds of ways that like alt-right memes. Stone Toss is a really good example. Like, no, if you just looked at his content, there's nothing that an algorithm could pick up that would actually like trigger anything.
Yeah,
But
I don't give a fuck about it. I mean, that's the point, isn't it? That's why I said earlier that in order to effectively do this, you have to have a team.
oh yeah, no,
You
I
can't
entirely agree.
rely entirely on automated processes.
Oh yeah. You get you wouldn't even really need a team. You just need me. I clean up like Twitter and YouTube within a like a day.
I mean, probably
Sounds
not
a bit
even
Stalinist or something, right? Like I don't know. I don't know. I like the idea of having it in one person's hands. I know you're joking, but
I'm joking. I'm joking. But like, no. I'm really honest. Like, if I could write down a list of like channels to get rid of within and like you could ban them all within a day on YouTube, and YouTube would be like 100 times safer from like far right radicalization.
Well, yeah. So could any
At
any
least
researcher. That's why I mean that you
yeah.
have to have a team dedicated to sniffing this shit out, and the only way that you're going to get them to do that is to say, well, we're going to hold you accountable when this shit is platformed on your website.
Yeah, exactly. And the thing is that we've got to remember that we are kind of always fighting an uphill battle. Is that far right groups aren't like exactly working on they aren't playing by like the official rules. They're always finding ways to like do things that really should be against the rules, but like no one even like thought that they could do stuff like that. Or it's just very hard to trace. So one really good example is that YouTube allows you to have like you can sign into multiple accounts on YouTube. So this can actually allow for like mass botting. Basically like you can sign into like 100 accounts and then mass upvote stuff. And this can like kick it up in the algorithm. There were a couple of far right groups back in the day that did this. I actually helped alt right leaks pull one up, and it was a German one, Reconquista Germanica. They basically they basically had like a really organized server. It was about 2,000 people, but because everyone had like 10 to 50 to 100 accounts each, they could basically look like 200,000 people. That was for a reason. That was one of the reasons why, like, sort of 15 to 20 to sort of like 2019, there was this massive there was this epidemic of just like far right comments on any single video that criticized them, and it turned out it wasn't like because there were that many people who were radicalized. They were deliberately exploiting the algorithms, and this is one of the reasons why I'm actually not an advocate of like very clear and precise terms of service as well. I understand why people want those, but at the end of the day, the people who want those the most are the most malicious actors who will exploit them to their worst extents. The reason laws in general have some grey area is for that individual discretion, so that you can work out okay, this time this isn't really like breaking the spirit of the law. This time it is, and you can say,
Well,
okay,
that's the issue, right? I
yeah.
mean, like whether like, in other words, are you more worried about benevolent censors not having that discretion, or are you more worried about not trusting the judgment of corporate oligarchs to decide what is breaking the spirit of the law and what isn't?
I already don't.
Because
Yeah,
you
well,
know,
you don't have to. You don't have to
the more
trust
wiggle
them.
room there is, the more gray area there is, the more likely it's going to be used against the people they're most going to want to use it against, which is not the people who you wanted to censor. It's us.
It's actually, well, I actually don't entirely agree with that, because I think to most extents, projects that have tried to build these platforms that don't censor people and actually try to be as lax as possible and have very clear and precise rules have been absolute utter failures, because the first people who show up are Nazis, and the first thing they do is end up like having doxing wars on these platforms.
That's because they've been banned off the other places, and they go to the ones that pop up.
Yeah. In fairness, these are usually set up by pretty far right people as well.
That's true, but then that's part of the problem is that I think Minds did not actually start out as like a far right thing. It's just that the culture ended up becoming
but there's no reason that anybody but them would want to use it in the first place, because they've already got all the other platforms.
Well, we say that, but I thought like all the left wingers are being like banned off of everything. Why haven't all the Palestinian accounts gone to Minds to speak their views? It's because of the fact that
probably most of them have never heard of it.
Well, yeah, and there's another issue, right?
I do want to. I wanted to jump back in real quick.
Those are all issues. Those are all issues about creating fringe alternatives to start from scratch, rather than issues about taking the ones where people actually already are at and having much more specific terms of service with much less wiggle room for corporate oligarchs to use their own discretion.
I did just want to jump back in and say, like from before, I really did enjoy, what you said, Discord, where like even when you search, there's going to be like an algorithm and everything in the search. So I did want to just like clarify a little bit of what I was saying before. I think that we should delete as many of them as possible. The recommendeds, the leading from one video to another, because I understand if I go onto Ecosia or DuckDuckGo or so on or so forth, that there is going to be some level of, you have to have some type of ranking and so forth. But I do want to remove as many as possible. So I wanted to clarify that.
Yeah, I just don't know what like that fundamentally means in like I don't think I think if platforms tried to do that, you actually would have start from scratch alternatives that would show up that would have recommended features that would then suddenly just like would just outcompete them. At the end of the day, the reason these things are as big as possible is because of how effective they are at keeping people on their platforms, and part of that is the recommended features. Is the fact that they show people what they want.
Well, there could be a law then that's instituted that you're not allowed to do recommendeds on social media, and you could actually look at
I have a less radical proposal, because I share Touring News's concern about algorithms. I thought I was going to be the only one. I'm glad to hear someone else thinking about it, because truthfully I don't know exactly how I'd go about approaching. But instead of a blanket heavy-handed ban, what if you passed a regulation that said that companies had to open their algorithm? Because right now it's all a trade secret. It's all the secret Coke formula. These are heavily guarded, and we don't know what they're doing. We don't know how they work. What if we said, okay, you have to open up your algorithm. We have to be able. The public gets to see how the sauce is made, and if there's something there, that way we can see how it works and respond to that.
For the same reason that it's a bad idea to get rid of algorithms altogether, or as much as possible. That would also be a bad idea, because it would make it so much more easily exploitable.
Then what are the solutions without giving power to Jack Dorsey, Sundar Pichai, and Mark Zuckerberg? Like,
They already have the power.
Yeah, they
this is
already
why
have
I'm
it.
trying. Well, this
We're
is
trying to take it
but this
away
is
from
why
them.
this
That's
is why I'm trying to
no,
like.
Can't.
Okay, we have to have
Yeah,
one
but,
person speak.
but I think saying that they already have the power sort of misses the point, right? Like if the question is what's going to happen, then the answer on some level is whatever they want to happen, and the whole discussion is pointless.
No,
But
that's not
if
true.
you're saying it's like, oh, I want them to censor more, then you're saying that you're willing, you want to have a position on advocating what they should do, and now the question is the position that we should advocate one where they censor more, they censor less, where they take more power for themselves.
The question
I think arguing if this is just more or less censorship is kind of.
The question is what is practical. The question is
sure, but within the range of practical alternatives, you have alternatives where the terms of service are clearer, and alternatives where it's less clear, alternatives where it's easier for them to kick people off, and alternatives where it's harder for people to kick them off. And if we're going to argue about which one of those is best, I guess I just don't see the point of saying that they already have the power. It's like, yeah, we're sure they do, but the question is, should we want them to have more power than they currently do, or less power than they currently do?
I don't think they have more.
One at a time.
I am not talking about giving them more power. I'm talking about getting them to use their power, the power that they already have, in ways that are better for us and worse for extremist groups who need that platform.
Okay, so how?
I'm talking about making them more effective, I guess, at choosing their targets.
Okay, how would we do that?
I think.
Wait. That's a question for Vivian. That's a question for Vivian.
A real official idea that could work is that you have a democratically run watchdog group that then has actually does have an eye into the platform and the algorithm. That then it has a much more defined and strong policy on what they want to get rid of and what they think should be allowed, and then that watchdog group actually pressures Facebook and Twitter and stuff to actually they basically pressure these sites into how they into how they censor stuff, like some kind of basically it's a third party inquiry system.
When you look at groups like the SPLC or the ADL, for example, these groups have enormous power in keeping certain people out of the general kind of political arena, right? Because that sort of that tagline of SPLC designated hate group, right, instantly delegitimizes people generally in the eyes of the public. That's been degraded somewhat over the last couple of years, but essentially what Discord Spies is saying is like an extension of what I would say, which is that we need to find ways and organizations that can hold these social media companies accountable. So I guess I would propose some form of even legislative power to say, if you continuously platform this particular kind of content that under other circumstances could contravene laws, right? We're gonna have to take some form of action against you, be it a fine or whatever, right? You just got to find some way to hold them accountable, and I think an independent watchdog is actually a really, really good idea.
Yeah, like the fact is at the moment is that YouTube's appeal system is a very internal thing. They have a couple of there's appeal people that you can talk to. So I've had a couple of YouTube videos taken down, and then basically YouTube's come back and said, oh yeah, this is actually against the terms of service. And even the guy who was part of the YouTube system was like, I actually don't agree with this. I think this is kind of rubbish. This is kind of a bad decision by them, right? And the fact is that because they're from the inside, it's much harder to do that. If they were an independent watchdog, this could be a thing that then there could be a lawsuit on it. There could be a precedent on it. obviously I don't think like my one YouTube video was actually that important in the grand scheme of things, but from a much larger situation. So like let's take the Twitch ban of Dr. Disrespect. Like, what the hell happened there? That is something that is very big and very public. Where I actually do think that there should be some kind of recourse to sort of appeal that situation, as opposed to say like Zio Cuck 1488, who like starts posting like happy merchant memes, and yeah, like he's gonna get taken down, and I don't see why there needs to be some like very very specific rule of like happy merchant memes are officially considered a like part of like Twitter's terms of like an actual rule stipulation in Twitter's terms of service.
Oh yeah, because we saw that with YouTube as well, like the way in which blanket banning those sorts of things tends to affect much more those people who are calling it out rather than the people who would actually do it, because the people who would actually do it just kind of avoid doing it, and then the people who seek to educate on it obviously kind of had to show these things to be able to do so.
Yeah, and the problem is we focus way too much on whether or not we should actually ban like far right content creators. We should be talking about like how these things can actually backfire on like the honest creators and finding ways to differentiate between the two. Because if all of our answers are just going to be, well, big tech should censor less, then guess what? They're not going to do that, because they understand that if they just censor less, these places just become cesspits.
Well, yeah,
a couple years ago,
so there has to be like a human contribution, right? Because there has to be, like you say, essentially an independent adjudicator who like looks at content and decides whether, you know, it follows the spirit of the law, the spirit of the TOS.
I'd honestly be
that's like a big expense for tech companies to do, because it would actually be quite a large operation. I know you said, you know, you could get in there and clean out a shitload like all by yourself. I'm sure you fucking could. I know I could probably rattle off about 1,000 Twitter accounts that should just be removed. But the point is, you know, there's like thousands upon thousands upon thousands, and obviously as soon as you start banning, as soon as you start making an appeals process more accessible, it's going to be fucking overloaded and inundated with this shit. So it's going to be a huge expense for that tech company. So you essentially have to make it more expensive for them not to do it. And
that's true.
Let me throw it over to someone else to respond to. No, that's okay. I just wanted to give someone else a chance to respond to like what's being said and this idea of like a regulator. Like, what do we think about that from anyone else?
It just sounds like we have, or you know, like people said, the SPLC. It seems like we already have that. They're baked in. They're part of the problem. They're largely ineffectual. I mean, when the New York Post story got censored by Facebook, what did they say? Oh, we're having our overseers look into it. So they have these boards. They're part of the problem. I don't see where that solution goes. I'm much more interested. Oh, sorry.
Well, I think this is actually a genuine. This is a point where like the case of the Hunter Biden story is actually a very good example of just saying like, oh, we shouldn't censor anything, because that like just advocating that isn't going to stop them from doing it. They need rules on what they can and can't get rid of. The thing is,
I think we should pass a lot of regulation.
And I honestly think that safe for that situation,
we should prioritize our openness and transparency. And I would also like to make an argument for why I favor breaking up over nationalizing, which is something I'm interested in because I'm open to the other side as well.
Yeah,
but we can go back to that later.
I just want to say, like, I do think we shit on the algorithm as much as we do, but I actually do think that the past like 5 or 6 years have actually improved it significantly. The amount of like and this is as someone who used to be like I was sort of in the thick of it when it came to going against like far right harassment. The problem is the problem several years ago was so much worse than it is now. But like, oh yeah, okay, you could like joke about killing your friends on Twitter. Like at the end of the day, I think that as bad as sucky as it is that sometimes you can't make like jokes that you very easily could on Twitter like several years ago. That the reason is that at the end of the day, these kinds of forms of censorship are they're chemotherapy, and they are going to hurt. They are going to have like negative knock-on effects, and we need to make sure that these things are a bit more clear, like a bit more effective at dealing with sort of like the negative sides of this, and like they hurt like non-malicious actors less, but at the end of the day, they are like trying to make these rules more lax is not going to have the effect that people want it to. It's just going to make social media a worse place.
I'm actually not advocating making the rules more lax. I'm advocating making the rules a lot more stringent on the tech platforms.
Yeah, I
like
guess,
for instance, enforce transparency.
So what happens when? Okay, so
oh,
okay.
Yeah, go on, Ben.
Go on, Ben.
So I think enforced transparency is good. I think it would make it easier for bad actors to game it, but I think that's not the most important consideration. I think that I'm much more concerned about giving more power. And when you have less transparent rules, you are giving more power to the corporate oligarchs who run this place. When you have more transparent rules, you're giving them less power. If you're giving them more power by having less transparent rules, I'm a lot less concerned about jokes that you maybe might not be able to make because they're like collateral damage, for something that has good effects, than I am about vagueness and ambiguity being used as an excuse to censor the left and to do things like take down all of those little Palestinian Facebook groups. I think that's a much bigger concern to my mind, right? So if our primary concern is how do we avoid having bad far-right content, I can totally understand why a couple of you would favor less transparent rules, more vagueness, more room for big tech censors to make their own individual judgment calls about what falls within the spirit of the law. But if the main thing that we're concerned about are these platforms as an organizing tool, the main thing we're concerned about is stuff like the free flow of information, freedom of the press. It's incredibly disturbing that a major newspaper publishing a extremely newsworthy thing just before the election was censored for the flimsiest and most bizarre reasons. And
for no reason. It was literally no reason. They didn't tell us why.
Okay, so I think that was
that's the primary victims of giving that greater power, those less transparent, less rules, that the primary victims will be on the left. I don't understand why not.
Okay, so I think with so we'll take the Hunter Biden story as an example. I think that was a bad decision that was that ended up being made. But the thing is that they learned from that mistake. They realized, oh my God, this is too far. They really did, because they stopped censoring. They actually toned down the censorship on that story. They didn't.
No, they didn't. I watched the testimony, and Jack Dorsey said the only way that the New York Post is going to get their Twitter account back is if they delete it. So how do you think that they toned down their censorship of it? I literally watched the Senate testimony.
There were points where people were posting were being banned for even posting the article.
I watched the Senate testimony where Jack said the only way the New York Post gets their account back is if they delete the tweet. So how are you saying that they learned a lesson from it and they've already changed their position on it?
Well, okay, so they have actually. What I said is, okay, so here's my criticism of the situation is that they actually banned like anyone from even posting the story or tweeting about it or posting images of Hunter Biden
or DMing people.
Yeah, or DMing people, or etc., right? They did walk back on that part. They have yet to walk back on the New York Post situation, and I actually do think to some extent there is an argument to be had there that the New York Post actually posting something that they openly within their own company understood to be like not really serious information. Like most of the reporters didn't even want their bylines on it because it was because it was so poorly verified that presenting themselves as a news organization is close to fraudulent. Like they're almost like leaning into fake news bullshit at that point. And I don't know, like it's hard because at that point you're talking about a corporate entity. You're talking about a corporate entity versus another corporate entity. I don't necessarily know. Like they're both sort of fighting with each other, and I don't know if like one of them calling themselves the press really matters, because at the end of the day, if Andy No posted some fake news stuff, and then like posted just an openly fake story, and then he got banned for it because it was very obvious that he knew he was lying, and he tried to like scam people. Or actually, here's another good example is what's his name?
Blair White?
What was his name? He's like that Trump supporter guy who keeps trying to scam people. He's like friends with Laura Loomer. Laura Loomer, she's a great example, right? Laura Loomer, she's a perfect example of this, where she posts obviously false information, and then gets banned for it, right? And like there is a process by which those people need to be taken off. They have the effectively the rules are the way that we understand the press and the way that we understand like the social media oligarchs. I don't necessarily think they're all like I don't necessarily think that these are necessarily all the same thing, because a lot of these news organizations are also owned by corporate oligarchs. Like most most right-wing media is owned by Rupert Murdoch.
That's fine. Let me throw it over to Ben. Ben, what's your response to that then? Let's go.
All media organizations are owned by corporate oligarchs. If you don't believe that corporate oligarchs don't have freedom of the press, you don't believe in freedom of the press, period, full stop. If you're talking about the Nixon administration trying to stop the New York Times from publishing the Pentagon Papers, you're talking about the free speech rights of a corporate-owned entity. The question is not about corporate ownership versus other kind of ownership. The question is, are you in the business of publishing news, commentary, and opinion, or are you an entity that's trying to stop people from publishing news, commentary, and opinion? And if you think that, okay, we can have freedom of the press right up until the point where it's a dubious story, or we don't think that they checked it enough, then again, you just don't have freedom of the press, because in all of the most significant places, the places where freedom of press is going to be most important to us, whether that's being shut down by government censors or big tech censors, you're going to get dispute about the underlying story. If it's some left-wing magazine that's publishing, the equivalent of the Pentagon Papers sometime in the future, of course the government and the military is going to deny it. And so if you've opened up this massive gaping loophole within your commitment to the freedom of the press, where you say, well, okay, but if the story is wrong, or if we don't think the journalistic standards are high enough, then we don't care about that, then you have legitimized shutting down that story. And in the Hunter Biden story specifically, yeah, there was a story that a big deal was made of reporters at the New York Post saying that, that they didn't think it was a good story, so they took their bylines off. But we haven't actually heard the worked out objections, exactly what was wrong with it. And in fact, we know that a lot of what was initially claimed isn't true. It was initially claimed this is Russian disinformation, but I think we can rule that out with 100% certainty, because if it was, then the very first thing the Biden family would have said is, "What are you talking about? Those aren't real emails. Those aren't real text chains," and they didn't have it. When you have stories like this, like when Edward Snowden, revealed the NSA spying. They're oftentimes the best, generally speaking, the best way you can tell whether it's real or not. You can try your best to verify it in advance, but the best guarantee that you can have is if the object of the story doesn't even deny it when presented with the chance to do so. So I think we can be fairly clear that this is solid. And so the question is there something about this story that was unusually dubious, right? Out of all of the
with this story, I don't think this individual story was dubious.
Social media every day. There's no reason to think that this one was particularly dubious. The reason the reason was pretty straightforwardly political. It was pretty obvious that it's a week before the election and they're doing damage control. And so I guess I don't understand how this isn't the scenario that we're most worried about happening, because it doesn't get a lot more clear cut than this, that rules being as vague as they are, having as much wiggle room as they are, is allowing some really disturbing censorship than a major newspaper publishing a story that's embarrassing to a certain political faction and it being suppressed in a really heavy-handed way by Twitter.
Okay, so I do think that to some extent we have to understand that this one case should be opposed on its like as an individual case, and I think that we need to I do genuinely think that we need to understand that even in the sense where we're talking about we're talking about sort of like how vague these rules are, that's not going to change how easily like how much power these organizations have. They are going to need to have like we need to be more direct with our criticism of individual cases of harassment, and we need more or individual cases of these terms of service. Like when it comes to, say, a major newspaper making a dubious story, yeah, people should be allowed to tweet that. And I think like that is an uncontroversial opinion. I think that's even held by a lot of like Twitter's even people on within Twitter's sort of ecosystem. And the point is that I think they have understood that that situation failed. This was clearly a case of this was a test to see like how far they could go, and I do think they realized that they can't go that they couldn't go that far again. They haven't 100% walked back on everything, and I think there are a lot of reasons for that, where it's sort of like the cat's out of the bag. They've got to like take some kind of strong stance on this situation now. But at the end of the day, if we protest when things like this happen, and then we don't when Alex Jones gets banned, and we say, actually, yeah, that was a good decision by Twitter, that was a good decision by YouTube to ban him, that was a good decision by Spotify to ban him, because it's actually had a measurably good effect, I think that is a better way to go about this sort of. At the end of the day, there are very obvious cases of like basically people who make money off of openly like just harassing people. They harass people for money, and then they make super chats. Baked Alaska, Ethan Ralph, Leafy is a really good example. People said, oh yeah, there was a mass there was big protest about Leafy being banned, but at the end of the day, Leafy being banned was a good thing. He was an openly toxic part of the platform, and I think that we can't just say, okay, well the rules were too lax. What specifically did he do with Pokimane that was like really against the rules? I think when you make it overly legalistic, you actually end up. I think we've got to fight this on the terms that exist. When big tech starts harassing, when big tech starts clamping down on groups they shouldn't, we should say, not those ones. Because at the end of the day, they've got plenty of cases of actual, like, reasonable cases where they've actually broken stuff down that they need to, that if you start having to defend those, you'll just look like an idiot.
Okay, I just want to throw it to Torin News. Go ahead.
It's only a slight meme, but I'm mostly serious when I say this. We have to salt the companies. If we had 50,000 or 100,000 of us apply into the companies, then maybe we can begin to dictate what their terms of service would be.
Oh, hell yeah.
Because we're talking about a lot of things that we're never really going to be able to have the power to like influence or enact on. So if we actually want to like try to take some of the power away from it, we have to get people into the positions that are actually going to be able to influence it.
I wouldn't entirely agree, because I think also you've got to remember that like even like online protest against this sort of thing, even like just talking about it and arguing about it and complaining, is enough to get Twitter's attention. The fact of the matter is that the right-wing tech is censoring us narrative has managed to work all the way up to the president of the United States, who is now in a bit of a war with Twitter to try and prevent them from censoring right-wing content.
Really makes the case for decentralized propaganda apparatus over censorship, in my opinion. Really shows how one just completely outclasses the other.
So, I mean, this is one thing that I say a lot, is that the left needs better propagandists. the reason the president of the United States is buying into this narrative, apart from him just being an awful fucking dolt, is because the right are so fucking good at this particular kind of victim narrative propaganda, right?
Oh, exactly. They have a lot of they have more money behind it at the end of the day. So
that's why I think the Gravel Institute is really positive, actually.
I've really liked the Gravel Institute videos I've seen.
I'm not 100% like on board with their choice of animation, but I think the videos are a bit of an eyesore at the moment, in my opinion. But
they should have just copied like PragerU 100%.
Well, I mean, having
eyesore
eyesore animation is kind of copying PragerU, because in the early days, PragerU had really fucking terrible animation too. But they are really, they have a bit of money behind them. They're also managing to elicit a lot of sort of like crowd-funded donations and stuff. It's not quite the billionaire money of the Wilkes brothers, but they're doing pretty well. And they manage to put things out there that are like not long-winded leftist critiques, but shit that the average person who doesn't spend all day fucking thinking about this shit can like digest, right? So yeah, I think I think the solution to a lot of problems, in fact, is just to build better leftist institutions. That's why
money is only one of our disadvantages.
I really think the watchdog idea is a great idea, because it is something that we can do.
Yeah. Money is only one of the advantages on the right, and it's one we're probably never going to close. But another one is the right invest in each other. PragerU is out there giving a platform and launching all of these small creators. And sure, they launch total duds like Carolyn Burlish-Schlenklow, but they don't care about that. They can launch a dud like that because they're launching these personalities all the time, and they're supporting each other. Whereas on the left, we're canceling each other, and that's something that has to change.
We need to all take the cum pledge. We need to all take the cum pledge.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sorry, Viv, what are you saying?
I mean, the right cancels each other all the fucking time. I hate when people say that shit.
Does the right cancel each other? When does the right cancel each other?
Building and blah blah blah. Like, the right is constantly.
Karolyn Poroshenko is actually like right now trying to cancel Tim Pool for having Valshon.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
I mean, to some extent.
Yeah, I can understand where you guys are coming from, but the point is that, like, I think a lot of people live in a kind of bubble where they don't actually see what's going on in like right-wing circles.
I feel like the right does cancel culture, but the left primarily engages in cancel culture against each other, and I think that that's a cultural difference between the two of us.
Someone from my channel. Go ahead.
It is disproportionate.
Yeah, I think we don't have enough anti-fascists in the left.
Look, I tell you what. Look, there's a chap here who's actually written a fucking book about this. Okay, so Ben, give us your insights into cancel culture and stuff. What's your thought on this?
Oh god, yeah, he wrote that cancel culture book, didn't he? Oh Christ, Ben, why'd you do that? Sorry, carry on. You know I love you, but you might not always agree, but I love you.
I appreciate that. Because you'll have that reaction to it, then you'll have to buy it, so you know what's in it, and then I'll get to swim around in a cool pool of gold points like Scrooge McDuck. But no, I think that when we talk about cancel culture, I actually kind of prefer the out of date term call out culture. I think is more precise. But whatever, I'm happy to use whatever words people are using and argue about the things themselves, not what they call them. I think there's a myth on the right that this is primarily a left wing phenomenon, or it's something that like just emerges out of, like, I don't know, leftists secretly being Stalinists or something. I think that's completely wrong. I think that it's a disease of neoliberalism that infects the entire political spectrum. I think that it comes from the fact that we live in a late capitalist hellscape where people are incredibly socially atomized and they often feel the most sense of connection to other people online. One of the best ways of reinforcing that is by kind of drawing tribal boundaries, right? This person is in, this person is out. I think the bad incentives that are baked into the social media platforms themselves really incentivize that. The way that we have things like, that doing these things, right, sort of denouncing first and asking questions later, is a great way to reap likes and retweets, for example, on Twitter, and a lot of that does have to do with things that have been referred to earlier in this conversation, ways that because these are for-profit companies, they want to make their product as addictive as at all possible, and this is pretty out there at this point, right? Like, this is not a big secret that they've tried to make it as addictive as at all possible by baking in these incentives that really reward our worst impulses. And you can see this on the right, when people try to get some random barista fired for saying "fuck Trump," as much as you can see it in other parts of the political spectrum. And finally, at least in the United States, and I don't think the problem is limited to the United States, but I think it is kind of the epicenter of it. Most people work in non-unionized workplaces with at-will employment, and so doxing, has a special kind of terror in that environment. And I think that all of these things are what go into the problem. I think that when it intersects with the specific pathologies of the left, because we've been out of power for so long, that we tend to see politics in terms of taking a kind of performative moral stand, more than a real attempt to change the world. And I think the interaction of the two can be absolutely toxic. But I don't think that the problem is limited to the left. And in fact, if the left stopped denying that it was a problem, stopped denying that the phenomenon existed, and took some ownership of it, I think we actually have a much more plausible story than the right or the annoying "I'm a classical liberal" types can offer about it. And in fact, we have actual solutions to it, or at least partial solutions, which they don't, like some of the ones that have been discussed here, like socializing the platforms, bringing them under public ownership. So instead of his profit incentive to try to find ways to make them more addictive, we can make collective democratic decisions about how we want them to work, and like rebuilding the labor movement and ending at-will employment. I don't know that any of this all put together would completely solve the problem, but I certainly think it would go a long way. And I do want to go back to what Discord Spies was saying earlier at the end about tech censorship, but I also know that Turing has been patiently raising his hand.
It wasn't anything too important. There was a trusted member of my community who recommended a book, and I think I'm going to be adding this into my reading catalog. They said Wendy Liu wrote a book called Abolish Silicon Valley, How to Liberate Technology from Capitalism. And this sounds to be something that I'm going to consider required reading for myself to try to conceptualize some of these things. Because again, it really comes down to, for me, I think that we need this is slightly off topic, but I think that we need a data, Bill of Rights or a digital Bill of Rights. I think one of the big problems is targeted advertisement. Like I was mentioning before, I think the driving different content is one of the really big problems. And a lot of what we're talking about with further empowering corporations to decide what is and isn't good, I don't exactly think that that's good for the long run of 2025, 2030 and beyond. So I'm kind of in more of the camp of how can we attack their profit motives? How can we attack their power? How can we democratize the platforms, rather than at the moment really focusing on what should or shouldn't be allowed to be said.
Yeah,
I actually think that there's. Oh, sorry.
I just want to chip in. I just want to chip in and say one thing, okay? Just in the whole conversation, the one argument that I find a bit frustrating is when people say, and I do this myself sometimes. When you feel a bit doom appealed, you sort of go, "Oh, well, there's nothing we can do about it, etc., etc." Well, if there's nothing we can do about any of this, what's the fucking point of being a leftist, right? The whole point is there's insurmountable issues in society that we want to try and solve.
Yeah, no, but when I say it's a fucking pipe dream to democratize social media, I'm not saying this will absolutely never be achievable. It's what I'm saying is that by the time it is achievable, right, we'll have already fixed so many fucking problems in society anyway, right? We'll come at this from a completely different angle. We'll live in a different society.
Yeah, but would you make the same argument about, say, universal healthcare in America? Because that realistically is a pipe dream at the moment in America.
That currently is on the docket. That is
an achievable goal within the
couple of years.
okay, wait. What politician that's got a chance of winning an election at the moment is proposing universal healthcare? Tell me, because I'm a bit remiss maybe to not know.
Yes, I mean, within the next couple of presidents.
Bernie Sanders proposed it and got blown the fuck out. Like, I don't know. Like, no. Like, Biden isn't even running on a platform of universal healthcare.
Biden's actually, I will argue that Biden's public option is actually a very effective stopgap. If that actually works, if that is implemented and goes in that direction, even though it only covers 97% of Americans, like if they create basically a publicly like a much larger publicly funded method of health insurance that actually could open up leading towards Medicare for all as like a sort of like building on that. So I don't necessarily think that is too. It's not actually necessarily as far off as people think it could be. It's possible. But actually, I just wanted to say something about what Turing said, which was about like having standards and a data bill of rights and stuff like that. I actually think that it actually goes deeper than that. One of my friends works in app development, and one thing that we actually talked about is that there really isn't there aren't really the same kinds of like engineering standards around coding and tech and software as there are around hardware and actual physical around like physical things. There are there's so many like tech is so complicated, and it's so and especially when it comes to sort of like software itself, is that there aren't actual like standards for how to code things deep down right on the start. So having something like a data bill of rights might not even necessarily be possible until we start thinking about like looking into solving that problem. But I don't know. I'm maybe
I don't see how the two things are related. If we create a standard legislatively for what you have to provide the end user, then that will dictate standards below the stack. I'm an application engineer as well. Like something a standard we create legally would dictate.
Can you go work at Twitter
below the stack?
Can anybody who knows this on it kind of stuff? Can you all go work at Twitter?
Unfortunately, I'm anti big tech censorship, so I'm going to go and flip everyone back on. Everyone who's been canceled on Twitter, I'm going to flip back on.
Just gonna unban every account.
Yep, everyone's back, baby. What was that guy? Dr. Disrespect? I don't know who that is, but he's back, baby.
Okay. So yeah, I mean, we're starting to sort of reach the end of the sort of the panel. I just wanted to throw one curveball in before we start to wind things down, and it's quite a controversial one. And in fact, this one thing actually
I know what you're going to say.
So there was a clip of Carl Kalinske that was shared around by some stupid account that I won't name. And basically, the clip is Carl Kalinske. Well, it's described as Carl Kalinske saying Holocaust denial should be allowed or something like that, right? But if you listen to the clip, it's not necessarily him saying that. So my question to the panel, everyone can have a crack at answering this. Should we ban should tech companies be allowed to ban extremely controversial content such as Holocaust denial? What do we think?
I'll just go in since it's the hardest question that nobody wants to talk about. I mean,
let's go.
I was just being respectful, but no, go.
Yeah, I think that there are going to be a few such egregious cases that there's going to be broad consensus that it is okay to ban a couple of things. When I gave like my speech earlier and I said I'm quote unquote free speech absolutist, I do think that there are certain times where information is so heinous and horrible that it is going to have to be taken down. Now, do I know who I want to do this? Do I know how I want this to be done? I don't exactly, because, I think that we're all talking about the Kyle video. It was like a 20-minute long video. He said, like this person gets banned, then that person gets banned. Well, I hate to tell you leftists, but you're not going to get into power anytime soon. They're going to be coming after you pretty quickly. Somebody earlier was bringing up certain jokes or certain memes or so forth. But I will have to say, yes, there are a few scenarios. I thought that we were actually going to be getting into kind of the Charlie Hebdo case and talking about like should that be on. So I only have like one or two friends that are Muslim, and I spoke to one of them, and we were talking a little bit about like should that be allowed to be put on newsstands, out on the sidewalks in France? Because they mostly said that it's a secular nation. They have their laws regarding their speech. It's okay, but I don't want it to be out on newsstands. I don't think that people should be subjugated to seeing that type of information as they're like walking to cafes and so forth. So I think that this is a legitimately good question. I think it's a very difficult one to answer because I don't like other people, specifically, as Ben has been talking about, corporate oligarchs determining what we can and cannot say, especially as people who are content creators. One thing that I've said to my community multiple times is, with me, I cover a lot of like the war in Yemen, a lot of what's going on in Palestine, a lot of what's happening in Syria. I do like a lot of geopolitical coverage, and a lot of times I think that there will be a day where I say something, that people don't like. I'll pause there and pass it to someone else.
Okay.
Well, I just want to say that you don't have to watch a whole 20-minute clip when there's all these clip chimp accounts that chop them up for you. You only have to watch a minute.
That motherfucker clip chimp one of my videos. I'm like, sub YouTuber. What a fucking piece of shit. Fuck that dude. Just go criticize Biden. Get the fuck out of it. Anyway, sorry. Continue.
Thanks. I actually don't. I should have went back and rewatched the clip. I don't remember, but I will say this: should big tech be able to censor or ban Holocaust denial? I have no objection to any one term of service that any tech platform wants to enforce. If they want to enforce that, go at it. Have a ball. But what I'm against is the process being opaque. Trampling on our rights when a lot of these platforms ban you, you don't even know why. There's no consistency. They're not obligated to apply them consistently, and when they apply them inconsistently, we don't know because they don't tell us why. And also, a company like Google or Facebook, when they have terms of service, they're essentially imposing that term of service on the entire internet, which is why I favor breaking up over nationalizing. On the subject of should the government ban Holocaust denial, I pretty much blanket oppose speech regulations. I'm against hate speech legislation, and in this case in particular, what we're talking about is giving the government giving the state the power to determine. Hold on, I had a Chomsky clip quote up, but whatever. We're giving the state the power to determine what is historically accurate. And I don't believe that power should belong to the state or to anyone. Speech should belong to the people. We should remove all the levers of power.
I would here's gonna be my argument on this situation, is that specifically if I were part of like a one of these progressive, like theoretical progressive watchdog groups, my argument wouldn't necessarily be that Holocaust denial itself would be a mark, like an instant ban, but I think that pretty much everyone who would post Holocaust denial would do ban-worthy content in a bunch of other ways. The thing is every single alt-right personality, and this is and I can prove this, is either is someone or is friends with someone directly who will dox your family if you cross them.
Mm-hmm.
You can very easily make the case that every single one of these people is knowingly breaking the terms of service in as like broad a sense as possible. It's just that the way they break the terms of service makes it look awkward. And so yeah, like a lot of the time, using, say, Holocaust denial as a as sort of like a what would be the word, as a heuristic for banning these sorts of people, at least like for like in a sort of like a wider sort of like lesser evil sense, is probably not actually that bad. But like I think there would be better ways to do it, but it's better than not banning and just sort of leaving them to sort of metastasize on their own. Because Gab did that, and well, there was a mass shooter within months of its existence. So,
okay, Viv, have you got any sort of thoughts on the question? Well, I think I'd probably know your position, but
Get rid of the cunts. fucking what the fuck is the reports function for, you dickheads? Like, holy shit. No, what can you say? Like, you have a report function on these websites for a fucking reason. So, like, I feel like that's such a clear breach of like any website's terms of service that if they don't ban people who are openly engaging in Holocaust denial, then they should be called out. And that's why you need the fucking independent watchdog, because you need a group that's going to call them out that has some kind of like political or public pull, you know.
Yeah, we
And
need some kind of
they're
actual
allowed
official
to
power.
remain on their platforms whilst pushing Holocaust denial. I feel like that's a real big story that could make the mainstream media, that could actually cause genuine fucking outrage among, you know, the general public, which is who you need to convince, by the way. Like, the reason when anti-fascists dox somebody, for example, that they include a massive amount of information about all the fucking shit that they've been doing and saying online is not necessarily to convince other anti-fascists or other leftists that these are people that need to be avoided or what have you. It's so that when you send this fucking dossier to their employer looks at it and goes, fuck, I don't want to be anywhere near that shit, you know. You have to convince the normies. So yeah, the independent watchdog, I think, is important.
Viv, let's make one right now. Let's start up an organization.
Fucking do it. You know?
Okay, and Ben, what's your thoughts on the question of banning or censoring controversial things from social media?
Yeah, I actually don't think it's a hard question. I think that I think that I agree with Kyle Kalinske. I think that I don't think that Holocaust denial per se should be a censorable offense on social media platforms. Just like Logic, I was saying that he doesn't want to entrust the government with the power to decide, to decide question, like of historical fact, to police that. I absolutely don't want to give Jack Dorsey or Mark Zuckerberg that power either. And I'm willing to live with people having really disgusting views like that they can express as the as the price, right, of that the trade-off for not giving them that power. I think harassment, incitement. I think there are a few very narrowly defined things that I am comfortable giving them power. Given the amount of the flow of information they control. I think there are a few things that I'm comfortable giving the power to stop, but that's not one of them. And I think this is a good time to slip back in, if it's okay, just for a minute. What I wanted to say earlier about what Discord Spies was saying about how, what we should do is not say, oh, there should be clearer rules or more of an appeals process, but that that not that one, right? Don't censor that one. That's the way that we should do it. And I think there are a couple of really good reasons why that's not generally people who care about free speech, either in the official legal sense, or who care about free speechy concerns when it comes to tech platforms. Generally see it, because I think there are two problems with that approach. A sort of a la carte doing, it's like, oh, okay, well, this particular act of censorship is bad, rather than rules about what they say. And one of them is that I think that we have whatever power we do have to influence the decisions of these corporations, which is not much, but as various people have pointed out, protesting, making a fuss can have some impact. And I think that if our argument when we do that is it's bad that they censored us because we're good people, not bad people, I don't think we're going to be able to get as much support and assemble as big a coalition to stop that than if our argument is a principled one, that that you should have a right to express whatever views you want, and there should be these rules that are fairly broad. That's one reason. The other reason I think the a la carte approach is a bad one is because when the people who are most likely to be saved by the a la carte approach are the really big splashy cases, like the New York Post. But I think that you're a lot less likely to get a lot of case-specific public outrage about, say, Jacobin being treated that way than you are about the New York Post being treated that way. You're certainly a lot less likely to be able to summon up that kind of public outrage about some Palestinian Facebook group with 100 members that nobody's ever heard of being unjustly deplatformed than you are about something like the New York Post. And so I think our best bet for protecting the people most vulnerable to censorship is having clearly defined rules that apply to everybody, even if that does mean that some really horrendous stuff gets in, because that's the trade-off.
I'm actually going to completely disagree with that. I think it's the other way around.
I know you are. I was disagreeing with.
Yeah, no. There was a couple. There was a good example. There was a good example a year ago.
Response by saying that you're going to completely disagree, because I already completely. Yeah. I was saying it in order to express my complete disagreement with what you said.
I know. No, I know. It's a really good example about a year ago, right? Is like they started being very like YouTube just like mass banned a bunch of accounts. Most of them were like well, people thought most of it was alt-righters, right? So it was places like Red Ice TV, Martin Sellner, etc., right? But the principled approach actually ended up having people mostly complain about people like Martin Sellner and Red Ice TV being banned, where to some extent like when you try and fight even on a principled case, 9 times out of 10 it becomes an a la carte case. It's just you're doing an a la carte approach on the worst and most extreme examples. At the end of the day, I don't think this is a case of like dying on certain hills. I think we need to pick our battles on what should be okay to not censor. I think we need to pick our strongest cases first, and then the weaker cases at the end. I think dying on the hill of should should this 80-year-old Holocaust denier be taken off of Facebook is actually I think when we're talking about should that exist as a principle, I think that actually ends up distracting from the fact of those 100 person like Facebook groups of Palestinians, because I think we should be fighting for them first and actually bringing that up first, and then talking about whether or not the Holocaust denial is actually going to should be like on the terms of service later.
If what you mean by saying that we shouldn't die on that hill is that those aren't the cases that we should use as examples in fighting for the better rules, then I completely agree.
Yeah.
But your fight on the basis of whatever example you're going to pick is A, going to be more effective because you'll get more support, and B, it's going to be more likely to protect the people that you've never even heard of. If the way that you're objecting to these whatever examples you pick to illustrate it is about what you think the rules should be, not just on the fact that you think that the censors decided wrongly in those particular cases.
I just want to jump in and say I'm very. I'll be quick. I'm very excited to go back through and listen to this because I have some things that I have to think about. So thank you everybody for what you're sharing. Go ahead.
I also think one of the important things is probably to just educate the populace in general, just expanding ever so slightly on what I was saying about convincing normies that, like, you know, you have to show the most egregious acts in order to convince them. I think one of the other important things and something that should probably have a lot more work put into is to show how hate movements online translate into real world harm. I think there's probably even some people on this panel who are skeptical of like how like people doing random Holocaust denial on YouTube or Twitter can translate into like terror attacks and so on.
My question, but how much would it have translated if it hadn't been promoted for 5 years by companies manipulating people to get driven to that content?
Well, yeah, obviously, but that's what I mean. Like, in order to create any kind of public outrage against that particular kind of speech, to move it into the area where everybody pretty much agrees, like, yeah, no, this is bullshit. We probably shouldn't have that. Like, most people on the panel were like, yeah, fuck me. That like Holocaust denial is probably a breach of terms of service on every platform. Whether or not they agreed that we should actually seek it out and censor it, like, pretty much everybody was like, yeah, no, that's way too far. Nobody should be posting shit like that. I think you need to. I think you need to somehow educate the populace on sort of less immediately obviously harmful shit. Yeah. And again, I guess that's more of a job for like researchers and organizations like Hope Not Hate and so on.
Yeah, I think there needs to be a dedicated social, like progressive social media watchdog that actually needs to start building on this sort of thing.
I'm fucking sold. I think the watchdog idea is a great idea. I mean, I was basically coming in here saying hold them accountable, and you were like create a watchdog, and I was like, well, fuck, that's one way to like hold them accountable. I think that and then that's an independent group. That's a group with like complete transparency, so anybody can fucking look into their investigations, see what's going on, and so on. I think that's a really genuinely good idea. I think that's probably the best idea that's come up on this panel, but I'm sure Ben disagrees. But that's totally fine.
Whether I disagree or not, I mean, I think depends on what exactly the public watchdog group is doing and how it sees its mission. I mean, obviously, I think having more forms of public public oversight and public pressure on the social media companies is a good thing, right? So in that sense, I agree. I think where maybe I do disagree maybe with you in Discord Spies is about what sort of standards it should be pushing for.
Yeah.
I think the problem is that I think all standards are to some extent political and subjective. No matter how much you put you put stipulations onto them, they're always going to be basically biased in favor of the standard. So I could say I can say, oh yeah, my standards aren't I'm for good things and against bad things, but at the end of the day, the reason I think the reason anyone thinks like saying hi to your friend on Twitter isn't it shouldn't be banned or is because they think it's a good thing that it should not be banned. Well, actually, no. Let's just ban all social media companies. It's just like make them illegal. It's just ban social media. No more YouTube, no more Twitter, no more Facebook. Just get rid of them until the boomers can figure out how to like not be insane.
Holy shit, that's a Trump line. Let's just ban them all until we can figure out what's going on.
Guy, you were jumping a moment ago. I just wanted to throw it over to you. Did you just have maybe like a final say, and then we'll start to wrap things up? So, Logic Guy, what were you going to say a second ago?
I was gonna jump in and reference that Twitter joke. You complete imbecile. There's a zero difference between good things and bad things, and I was gonna say that joke never really fit with me because if the difference between the good things and the bad things is you like one and don't like the other, then there essentially is no real difference. That made sense in context like several minutes ago.
Okay.
Wow, that's a real dumb statement.
Okay.
The difference between good and bad things is obviously the harm that they do, right? Sorry, I didn't mean to go that hard. I feel like we were having a nice, agreeable panel, and I just went and ruined it.
No, it's fine. It's been fairly reasonable. Everyone's had some disagreements pleasantly, which is good. But I want to be respectful of everyone's time. We started a bit late, but we'll start to wrap things up now. Apologies again for starting it a bit later, time zones and all that. So what I want to do is I just want to go around to each person and just uninterrupted have a final say or thought on this topic, and then just shout yourself out. So I'll start with you, Ben.
I guess I feel like looking back at the discussion that when we kind of abstract away from all of the specific detailed positions that have been advocated, I do still think that the larger subject is how much power do we trust these people with, because all the specific things that we're arguing about, right? Should they be able to do this? Should they be able to do that? Should you be able to get banned for this? Should you be able to get banned for that? What should the standards be? Should the standards be transparent? Should the algorithms be transparent? These are all questions of whether they have more power or less power to decide what people can say on this platform. And it seems to me that what I came in thinking and came out thinking, so maybe this is just me being dogmatic, is that we don't have good reasons to trust them, and that when they have more power, we have every reason to worry that more power is going to be used against us, and that our best strategy for avoiding that to whatever extent it can be avoided, which is not total, is to have them have less power, to have there be fewer things that people can be shut down for saying, and for those things to be more transparent, for there to be more due process, etc. And I definitely think there are downsides to that. I mean, this is not an all this is not an all upside proposition. There are bad things about that, because that means that people can say really toxic, horrible things that the world would be better off if nobody was saying. But I think that if the trade-off is that makes it harder for them to censor important news, if the trade-off is that makes it harder for them to shut down the left, to shut down people who are fighting against injustice, and that we generally just get all of the benefits of relatively free and open discussion, then I am willing to make that trade-off.
Okay, and do you want to shout yourself out or anything you want to shill before?
Sure. So yeah, I guess I'll just repeat. You can read my stuff at Jacobin. The podcast, which is also a YouTube show, is called Give Them an Argument. And in terms of my long-term prospects of building that swimming pool with the gold coins that I mentioned earlier, if you want to buy any of those books, the place that I'd always recommend that people go to buy them is Redemmas, so REDEMMAS.org, which is a worker-owned bookstore in Baltimore, and it's all available there. And as we've been talking about with corporate oligarchs with vast control over the flow of information, I think if it's possible to buy something from a worker co-op rather than buying from Jeff Bezos' sweatshop, I think that's generally preferable.
Yeah, absolutely agree. Good stuff. Thank you very much. Yeah, great stuff. I'll move on then. So, David, do you want to just final thoughts and then just shout yourself out?
Okay, so I guess my bigger final thoughts are one of two things. I think for one, I think this discussion is very much about how much we are capable of regulating the free market of ideas, and I don't necessarily think that social media censorship is and whether or not the terms of service are in the hands of these sort of neoliberal corporatists is as much of an existential threat as a lot of other leftists do here. I think approaching these organizations as allies, and you can do that as a more sort of like as a progressive ally, as opposed to a leftist opposition force, is more likely to have a positive effect on the health of the social media platform than like some very like angry like free speech absolutist kind of approach, which seems to be which when put into practice seems to create like cesspits of online radicalization. I think that at the end of the day, we're always going to be working with band-aids for stuff we never really understood. Like, tech is still a very new situation, and I think we are only really talking about half the conversation here. It's also how we as individuals also interact, we as a culture and society interact with these platforms is also part of it. And I don't necessarily think it's all about how much they can ban stuff, but at the end of the day, I think that I don't think they are as evil and badly intentioned as we necessarily think they are. And coming at it from that perspective of let's see if we can get them to do things slightly better is a better option. But that's I guess about as far as I'm going to go. In terms of shilling, I'm at Discord Spies. I guess maybe I might even consider looking into the option of some kind of progressive watchdog group. I don't think I'd start it myself because I work full time, but I don't know. Let's see where we can go with that.
No worries. Good stuff. Logic Guy.
All right. Well, I just want to reiterate my opinion that there's zero difference between good things and bad things. And beyond that, invest in our own information networks, not in censorship. Remember, embrace solidarity, invest in each other, and put down the bell hooks and pick up the Saul Alinsky Rules for Radicals. And you can follow me on Twitter at Logic Guy. I have a new Medium article up on the best argument for voting for Biden and the best argument against voting for Biden. And I put other stuff up there too, like podcasts.
Good stuff. The true centrist position. I like it. It's good. Okay, Viv, what's your final thoughts?
God, I had a whole load of shit prepared in my mind when Ben Burgess was talking, and then everybody else talked, and I just completely forgot like 90% of what I was gonna say. But essentially, yeah, Ben Burgess was talking about power, and I think it's very important. I think honestly, the answer to so many questions that people have right now with like fears about the future and the the upcoming election and everything, I think I've given this answer to in so many different situations when talking about extremism, when talking about poverty, when talking about the prospect of like Biden not doing everything for people or Trump winning the election, is just that all of these things should motivate us to build strong leftist institutions, cooperative institutions that are there to fucking help each other. We have to lay the groundwork for a more cooperative society, and I personally believe that's only going to come from the bottom up. So with regards to power, I think you have to remember that you guys have the power. You right there, yeah, you guys have the power to like go out in your communities, get together and try and make something that's gonna last and make something that's gonna help people and turn society in the right direction. And until people start doing that, all this shit's always just fucking speculative, honestly. Like, how are you gonna place any pressure on a large tech company without a large amount of people to do it, right? So that's kind of my take. In terms of shilling, yeah, I'll just do my regular spiel, I guess. I am Mix Vivian Wolf on Twitch, Twitter, and YouTube. I'm I'm an anti-fascist historian and extremist researcher who talks about cults and extremism. Probably too much. There's always somebody in chat saying, how long is it going to be until Viv says the word Nazi? But all this week I've been doing interviews with extremist researchers, and they'll be going up on YouTube soon. We have everything from the leader of an anti-fascist organization, Daryl Lamont Jenkins, who's been on numerous news programs and called Andrew Breitbart a white supremacist to his face. That's a pretty fun little video. To more obscure stuff like the only really accessible English-speaking expert in Aum Shinrikyo, the Japanese cult that committed the sarin gas attacks in the Tokyo subway. So if you're interested in cults and extremism, I'd highly encourage you to give me a follow on all three platforms, Twitch, Twitter, and YouTube. And yeah, thanks very much for your attention.
No worries. And finally, last but not least, touring news.
Yeah, thank you for having me on, Chud. The actual only reason that I came on tonight was I heard that Ben was coming on, and I agreed a lot with Ben's positions kind of coming into the conversation, so I wanted to come and kind of like learn from that perspective. I think that you stated it very well about how democratizing and getting as much of the public ownership of these major tech companies is something that we have to continue to push for. The only thing that I would have added in is I was kind of talking against the recommended algorithms, the digital bill of rights, in order to kind of like usurp the profit motive that tech companies have at the moment. We're not only the users, but we're the product. Whenever you are told that something is going to be free, it's often not. And I think that we're now about 20 years into finding out that a lot of what we thought was going to be free from social media companies is they're taking our data. In the 21st century, big data is new oil. So I think that anything that we can do in order to usurp some of the power away from them is going to be important, whether that is through lobbying, through pressure, through developing a committee and a coordination like you were talking about, Discord. I think that was actually a really good idea of having like a unified way of applying pressure. I don't think that there's too much else that I wanted to add in. Later tonight, if anybody is interested, I am going on a panel with some friends of mine to talk about macroeconomics, monetary systems, and some of the digital currencies that are kind of rolling out through the world. Tomorrow morning at 9:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, I do Smaller Streamer Saturday to invite people onto my show. That way they can kind of like get in front of like a couple of other people if they wanted to. Sunday morning at 10 o'clock, I'm talking to Cool Guy Gorbis about biogas, environmentalism, Chinese environmentalism, renewables, and then Sunday at 1 o'clock Eastern, I am doing a podcast on cryptocurrencies, and I'm trying to figure out, is there a way to make a thesis that cryptocurrencies are actually an anarchist's form of money by trying to take power away from the state and the central banking system and the monopoly that governments have on the creation and issuance of currency at the moment. I'm still really trying to work through it to see if there's anything there.
Okay, cool. Good stuff. Well, look, thanks very much, everyone, for joining me.